After we've experienced the death of somebody we love deeply, there are outcomes that are naturally going to follow those primary losses. And when there is a primary loss in our lives, there are typically going to be secondary losses that occur also. But before we get to any description or understanding of secondary losses, for a moment, let's just consider what some of the primary losses may be. It could be a loss of a job, the death of a spouse or child, the death of a parent, or the death of a close relationship, the death of a precious family pet. So these losses could come in the form of death, or they could come in the form of a divorce or a traumatic event, a chronic illness, or many other major losses. So it's a large category covering many different things. So primary losses are going to happen in our lives. So when they do, let's spend some time now considering what some of the outcomes or byproducts are of a primary loss. A primary loss, like I said, leads to secondary losses. Well, number one, secondary losses are not necessarily reflective of just one big event. Part of our grief work is in realizing that these secondary losses are not usually acknowledged by other people in our lives, not even close or best friends. An example of a secondary loss is when a person experiences the loss of faith. Now, typically that goes unnoticed because you can't a lot of times visibly see a loss of faith that a person's experienced. But a person may experience the death of a best friend, which many times also goes unacknowledged by other people. There's no acknowledgement or understanding or shared kindness when a person has lost half or all of their income. No sympathy that's ever extended when a person loses a job. And as a result of that loss, the person has to move from one place to another place. I mean, these secondary losses are tiered, stacked one on top of the other. And it's very hard to describe if somebody doesn't become very aware that these losses are exactly that, losses. It typically is not empathy extended to a person who loses a business or loses a sentimental object that they've had for years. Now, you probably can think of many other secondary losses a person could experience because of a primary loss. So what I'm trying to say is there's going to be fallout in our lives after someone we know dies. And that fallout is to be equated with the secondary losses. These ancillary losses impacts our lives, sometimes in ways we don't even know. And as stated a few moments ago, these secondary losses are typically not going to be talked about unless we, as those who are grieving, bring up some of the byproducts of those primary losses. It could be that folks just don't know how to be present and supportive to a person who's grieving on an ongoing basis. Or it could be that those folks are not aware or cognizant of those losses because they're wrapped up in their own lives. And I just want to quickly say that's not necessarily a wrong thing that they're wrapped up in their own lives. Sometimes we learn to step up and just say, I need you to hear what I'm going through right now. Do you have a moment to talk? Now, when people don't acknowledge that these losses are occurring, it's not necessarily an issue of fault. I think it's more of an issue of awareness. People can choose to grow in awareness. And as people who are grieving, we're going to be sometimes in a position to be able to be there to support other people. And when we do, what's really important is to understand is we're very much aware of what's going on in our heart and our lives as a result of the primary loss. The question that I want to pose for a moment is, how may we become supportive and helpful to other people who have experienced a primary loss? Well, Dr. Alan Wilford wrote a book titled Companioning the Bereaved. He asked the question, how may we be a companion to the bereaved who are experiencing secondary losses? When we journey with a bereaved person, we realize pretty quickly that our responsibility is never to fix them. First and foremost, we can't fix anyone. We could be upfront with those grieving by just coming right out and asking, is there a way that I can be supportive of you? Is there a way that I can be helpful for you? We may acknowledge what some of those secondary losses are for the griever if we know what those specific losses are. And when you do, it's okay to speak up and acknowledge those specifically. You could also send them a card with words that could encourage them. Meet and go out for lunch or have coffee with them and ask guided questions. That's like open-ended questions, and then actively listen as they begin to talk. Be mentally present for them without a judgmental spirit. This many times is going to empower the bereaved to begin to share their story and even to go a little bit more deeply with you than they do other people, because they notice you're willing to listen. You're willing to be present in all ways. This is also a way to hold a sacred space for them so they know that when I'm with you, I'm able to talk about these things and you'll listen. Now, how may you be helpful and supportive towards yourself as you experience secondary losses? How may you demonstrate self-compassion? Compassion is many times pretty easy for us to share with other people when we recognize that people are suffering and we somehow, some way want to be able to support them, to show them that we care. I'm inviting you to demonstrate self-compassion, showing compassion towards yourself. Lisa Williams and Eleanor Haley, grief therapists, offer some recommendations on how you may assess your own secondary losses. Grab a piece of paper or get your journal, and I want to just mention a few things. Now go ahead and write down your primary loss or losses. Next, write down the secondary losses that are associated with the primary loss or the primary losses. Now, you're going to have time, and I would encourage you to take the time to be able to list in detail what those secondary losses are as a result of your primary loss. If there are losses associated with the secondary losses, write them down too. So as you're writing, notice if you hesitate to include secondary losses that may seem less significant or disruptive. May I just encourage you, push back on the impulse or the tendency and write down all those secondary losses. This exercise may help you reflect on the full impact of your grief, So you need to include all your secondary losses, big and small. Now, I know we've only spent a few moments, but I hope this has been helpful to you. You'll want to be able to just treat yourself with kindness and compassion as you're in the midst of grief. Now, remember, if you're wanting to watch the other past classes that we did, just go in the search bar on YouTube and type in AHC Grief Class. And all the other classes and sessions should be made available to you. Also, at the bottom of this video, in the description area, I have listed my email address. I want you to feel free to email me with any question you might have, or you can request the teaching outlines that I use for these classes. Thank you so much for the time you took today to watch. God bless.